The bell above the door jingled as the old man walked into Jackson's Grill, a Southern-style diner nestled in a sleepy town along Highway 59. His faded olive coat, pressed pants, and slow but steady gait barely caught anyone's attention, except for the manager. "Here comes trouble," mumbled Eric Jackson, the owner and manager of the place, to the waitress beside him. The old man paused just past the entrance, scanning the place. He seemed to be searching, not for food, but for something familiar. He smiled faintly, almost sadly, and made his way to a booth near the window. Eric watched him with the sharpness of a hawk. There weren't many black men who walked into Jackson's Grill, and certainly not ones who looked like they'd stepped out of a 1960s war documentary. His posture wasn't frail, though his bones clearly ached. "Don't serve him," Eric whispered to Becky, the teenage waitress. "He can leave the same way he came in." Becky hesitated. "But he hasn't even asked for anything yet." "I said don't." The old man, whose name was Walter Walt Hayes, sat silently, gazing out the window. He'd driven nearly an hour just to sit in this very booth. Years ago, this place wasn't called Jackson's Grill. It was Sammy's Diner, and it was the first restaurant in the South to ever serve him without making him sit near the kitchen or behind a curtain. Back then, Walt was just 22, fresh from the war. But even with medals on his chest, he still wasn't allowed to eat beside a white man. Today, he came not for the food, but for the memory. To remember Sammy, the kind-hearted owner who broke tradition and welcomed him. But now Sammy was dead, and Eric, his son, had inherited both the restaurant and the prejudice his father fought against. After 10 minutes of being ignored, Walt gently raised his hand. Becky approached nervously. "Ma'am," he said, with the politeness of a preacher, "could I get a cup of coffee?" Becky glanced back at Eric, who gave her a hard stare. "No, sir, we're not serving today." "Equipment problem," she lied. Walt's eyes flickered. "You're serving everyone else." The diner was half full, people laughing, clinking forks, sipping drinks. Becky looked away. "I'll wait," he said softly, and resumed staring out the window. Eric had seen enough. He stormed out from behind the counter and walked straight to Walt's booth. "I don't know what you're trying to prove, old man," Eric growled, "but we don't need your kind hanging around here." The diner went silent. Walt looked up slowly, as if weighing something. "My kind?" "Yeah, your kind. Always looking for a handout. Always playing victim. Well, not in here. Not in my daddy's restaurant." Walt's face didn't change. He didn't raise his voice. "I'm not looking for a handout. I came here to remember someone. Your father was a good man. Don't talk about my father like you knew him. I knew him better than you ever did," Walt said calmly. Eric's fists clenched. "I'm giving you 10 seconds to leave, or I'll drag you out myself." Walt stared up at him. "Would you throw out a veteran?" Eric scoffed. "You? A veteran? Don't make me laugh. You're just some washed-up old fool in a coat that smells like mothballs." Walt slowly reached into his coat pocket. Eric tensed. Out came a folded letter, yellowed by time, and beneath it, an ID card. U.S. Marine Corps, Staff Sergeant Walter Hayes, retired. He laid it on the table gently. "You really don't remember, do you?" Walt said, voice quiet. "You were only 5 the last time I saw you, sitting behind the counter, drawing stick figures while your father served me peach pie." Eric's face twisted. "Get out of my restaurant." Walt picked up his items, placed a $10 bill on the table even though he hadn't been served, and slowly stood up. But then something changed. He turned to the diners who were watching in stunned silence. "Some of you remember me," he said. "I fought for this country when I was barely a man. Lost brothers in Korea. And your town, it used to be different. It used to be better." He looked at Eric. "Until men like him forgot." Walt walked outside, the sun setting behind clouds. He pulled out an old flip phone. Dialed. "Yeah, it's me," he said. "He's still got the place." A voice answered, muffled. "No," he didn't recognize me. "But he's about to." Pause. "Let's do it." He ended the call. Back inside, Eric was laughing with a few regulars. Guy thinks he's a hero. Damn shame. Then, the door opened again. Two black SUVs rolled up outside, and then 3 men in dark suits and a woman in uniform walked in. Everyone turned. "Mr. Walter Hayes?" the woman asked. Her voice was firm but respectful. Eric's laughter stopped. "What the hell is going on?" The woman ignored him. She found Walt by his car, saluted. "We're here, sir." Walt nodded. "Let's go inside." Walt entered again, but this time with authority behind him. Eric stared, pale. The lead agent turned to Eric. "You the manager?" "Yes." Eric stammered. "Then you should know this establishment has been selected for a federal investigation tied to a civil rights abuse case involving veterans." "What?" Walt looked at him calmly. "Like I said, your father was a good man, but you're about to learn what it means to answer for the past." Just before Eric could speak, Walt turned to the uniformed woman and said, "Show him the photo." She reached into a file and handed it to Eric, his face drained of all color. "That's not possible," he whispered. Walt just smiled. "Oh, it's very possible." Eric's hands trembled as he held the black and white photograph. The edges curled with age. In the picture, a younger version of his father, Sammy Jackson, stood proudly in front of the very diner they were in now, back when it was called Sammy's Grill. Next to him stood a tall man in uniform, Walt Hayes, young, strong, metal-lined. And behind them, a burning cross, barely visible in the background shadows. Eric's voice cracked. "What is this?" Walt leaned closer, his voice like thunder behind calm lips. "That was 1964, the day your father refused to join the local chapter of the Klan." Eric stumbled backward. No, my dad, He protected me that day," Walt said. "He pulled a shotgun on his own cousin to keep them from dragging me out back." Walt's voice tightened. "But that's not the photo that matters." He snapped his fingers. The woman in uniform stepped forward, opening a file folder. She handed Eric a second photo, color this time. Clear, recent. It showed Eric himself, laughing in the parking lot behind the diner, beside a known member of a modern hate group, a man currently under federal surveillance. "You're not your father, Eric," Walt said. "You're something much worse." Inside the diner, customers watched in silence. Some stood, some took out their phones. Nobody dared intervene. The agent spoke up. "Mr. Jackson, you are now the subject of an open civil rights investigation under Article 242 of the U.S. Code, deprivation of rights under color of law." "What the hell does that mean?" Eric barked. "It means," Walt said slowly, "that humiliating someone based on their race, status, or veteran identity on federal property or in a place that receives federal support is a felony." Eric scoffed, trying to save face. "This ain't federal property." The agent didn't flinch. "Actually, Jackson's Grill received a COVID-19 relief grant from the federal government. That makes this establishment subject to Title VI regulations." A diner gasped. Walt smiled faintly. "You didn't read the fine print on those PPP loans, did you?" In the corner, Becky, still holding a notepad, suddenly stepped forward. "I need to say something," she said, voice shaking. Eric's eyes widened. "You shut up." "No," she said louder. "I've worked here for 8 months, and I've seen everything. He's told us not to serve certain people, old black men, immigrants, even a homeless veteran who came in once asking for water." Walt turned to her gently. "Did you ever write any of that down?" Becky pulled out her phone and opened her voice memos app. "I recorded some of it. I didn't know if I'd ever use it, but I can't be quiet anymore." The agent stepped forward. "We'll need to hear that." Eric lunged at her, but before he reached her, 2 deputies stepped in from outside. "Keep your hands to yourself, Jackson," one of them warned. Eric stood frozen, sweat running down his temple. The diner emptied slowly. Patrons whispered. Some left cash on the tables and nodded toward Walt. One older white man, with trembling hands, approached him. "I was there," he said softly. "I remember you, Mr. Hayes. You saved my brother." Walt studied his face and nodded. "Vietnam? June 10th, 69, the man said. Da Nang, you pulled him out of that ambush." He wouldn't be alive today if not for you. The man handed Walt something. A medal, tarnished but unmistakable. He said if I ever saw you again, to give you this. You earned it more than he did. Walt stared at it for a moment, overcome. Then he turned to Eric. I wasn't just a soldier. I was a savior, and your father knew it. That's why he served me when no one else would. Eric's eyes darted, blood draining from his face. Just as the agents began interviewing staff, one of them gestured to Walt. We found something in the basement, sir. Walt raised an eyebrow. They walked through the kitchen, into a dusty hallway, and down a narrow stairwell that hadn't been used in years. At the bottom, a locked door. Eric had followed reluctantly, chained to guilt. The agent pried open the door. Inside, a rusted safe sealed with a rotary lock. Walt squinted. That belonged to Sammy. He used to say, "Truth don't hide, it waits." They cracked the safe open. Inside were dozens of files, original receipts, handwritten letters, Polaroids, names, dates, signatures, and one sealed envelope with the words, "To be opened if Walter Hayes ever returns." Everyone went still. Walt sat down on an overturned crate and opened the envelope. His fingers trembled, not with weakness, but gravity. Inside was a long letter, dated 1989. It read, "Walter, if you're reading this, it means I'm dead and my son has failed you. I always feared this. I raised Eric to be strong, but I didn't teach him to be kind. I watched this town change, watched the good get buried beneath slogans and flags they don't understand. But you were the bravest man I ever knew. Not because you fought a war, but because you came home to fight a country that still hated you. If Eric disrespected you, take this file. Use it. Make it right. You deserve peace and justice. Sammy Jackson." Walt wiped his eyes, but Eric looked like he'd seen a ghost. "What's in that file?" he asked, stepping forward. Walt stood. "It's your family's legacy, Eric, and your damnation." He dropped the folder on a nearby table. Inside, a ledger of hush payments. Names matched with amounts. One entry stood out. 1982 J. Maynard, $12,000. To keep quiet about the river incident. The agents froze. Walt narrowed his eyes. The river incident. I've heard of that. A young black boy found dead near the dam. Covered up. Eric turned pale. That wasn't us. That was before me. But it was your father's diner where the boy was last seen. Walt said. And now the truth has surfaced. The agent's radio crackled. HQ confirms that cold case just reopened. Eric fell into a chair, stunned. Just as the agents began boxing up the evidence, one of them pulled Walt aside. "There's something you need to see. It was buried in the back of the safe. Do well to smash the like button, subscribe, and share." She handed him a sealed cassette tape, labeled "Only." For Walter's ears only, May 3rd, 1987. Walt stared at it, breath caught in his throat. He looked up. "Give me a tape player. Now!" The screen fades to black. Inside the dusty office of Jackson's Grill, time seemed to slow. The agent placed a small portable tape player on the table. Walt took a seat. Becky and two other staff members gathered near the door. Eric sat across from him, pale and silent. Walt hesitated before pressing play. Then, whir, click, a voice came through, warped slightly with age, but clear. "Walter, if you're hearing this, it means I've failed to protect the truth any longer. There are things I've done, or rather, let happen, that I can't die with unspoken. I owe you more than a pie in a booth, my friend. It's about May 3rd, 1982. The river, and the boy they tried to forget." Eric's eyes darted back and forth. The voice continued. His name was Deshaun McCullough. He was 14, smart, curious, black. That day, he walked into this very diner and never came out. Walt's hand clenched on the table. "But I saw who followed him out back, and I stayed silent for 40 years. One of them was a local deputy. The other, your uncle, Henry Jackson." Eric stood up. No, that's a lie." The agent raised a hand. "Sit down." The tape clicked on. Deshaun never drowned like they said. They beat him, killed him, dumped his body in the river, and paid the coroner to say it was an accident. Silence. Then, the boy's mother, she came to me, begged me to tell the truth. I told her I'd help, and then the threats came. Anonymous calls. Slash tires. I was weak. I stayed quiet. I buried the truth in this basement, waiting for someone braver than me to finish what I couldn't. The tape ended. Walt sat back slowly, staring at nothing. Becky wept. One of the agents turned to her. Get me every living relative of Deshaun McCullough. Back upstairs, a group of federal agents and county officers now surrounded the property. The old sign that read Jackson's Grill had never looked more ironic, because now the town itself was on the grill. Inside the safe, more papers were discovered. Bank transfers showing regular payments to a man named Dr. Carl Demmons, the same coroner who ruled Deshaun's death an accident. A name popped out on one page, written in shaky handwriting. Sheriff Thomas Rayburn. Wait, Becky whispered. Sheriff Rayburn is still the sheriff. Walt nodded grimly, and has been for over 30 years. Later that evening, Walt sat outside the diner on a bench beneath a dying streetlight. His hands rested on the cane he never needed, just preferred. His mind reeled. He heard footsteps behind him. A woman approached slowly, early 50s, wrapped in a coat, eyes swollen with grief. Mr. Hayes? Walt stood gently. Yes, I'm Tamara McCullough. Deshaun was my little brother. He removed his cap. Ma'am, I am so sorry. Tears fell silently down her cheeks. I never thought anyone would remember. Everyone told me to move on. Told me he was just another boy who couldn't swim. He was more than that, Walt said softly. He mattered, and I will make sure the world remembers that. She stepped forward and embraced him. But watching from across the street, inside a parked truck, was a man with binoculars and a police badge glinting beneath his coat. Sheriff Rayburn. Later that night, just past midnight, the diner went dark. Walt had gone to rest at a nearby motel provided by the agents. The FBI officers took shifts watching over the evidence at the diner, but someone was watching them. Two men crept through the alley behind the diner. One held a gas can, the other a radio. Make it look like an accident, the voice on the radio said. They poured gasoline into the basement stairwell, lighting it silently. Whoosh! The O would caught instantly. Sirens didn't start until it was too late. By the time firefighters arrived, half the diner was engulfed in the basement. The safe, the files, the ledger was ash. The next morning, Walt returned to find yellow tape, smoldering ruins, and Eric in handcuffs. A federal agent approached. We got arson on tape. Surveillance footage. Two men, both traced back to the sheriff's office. Walt's face hardened. But, she continued, something strange happened. As the flames spread, one of the firemen pulled a metal lockbox from the ashes. She handed Walt the box. It had survived, burned black, hinges warped, but inside, somehow preserved, was one singular item, a letter sealed in plastic. Not from Sammy, but from Deshaun McCullough. Walt opened it slowly. The handwriting was childish, but legible. Mama says some white people hate us, but Mr. Sammy gave me pie today. He said I reminded him of his son. He said, don't ever walk home the back way. But Henry, Mr. Sammy's brother, told me to go out the back and get free cookies. I don't know why, but I don't like him. I feel scared. If something happens, tell Mama I was brave. The paper shook in Walt's hands. Tamara, who had returned, broke down sobbing. He wrote this the day before he died. She whispered. We thought it was lost. Walt looked up. Not lost. Buried. Just like him. With the letter, the tape, the recordings from Becky, and new witness testimony, the federal case exploded. Sheriff Rayburn was indicted within 48 hours. A warrant was issued for Henry Jackson, but he vanished. The town was torn in half. Some still denied everything. Others wept openly in the streets. Eric, now in jail, refused to speak. But Walt knew it wasn't over. One night, he received a call. Private number. A man whispered, You think this ends with Rayburn? You think Deshawn was the only one? Click. The next morning, Walt opened his motel door. A box sat at his feet. Inside, a military medal identical to one of his, but scorched at the edges, a single Polaroid photo of a boy he didn't recognize, and a note, 1981, he was first. You just never knew it. Walt stood frozen. More victims, more secrets. The man they tried to break was just beginning to uncover the rot. Walt held the Polaroid under the cheap motel desk lamp. The boy looked no older than 10. Wide smile, hand-me-down overalls. In the corner of the photo, a street sign, Hickory Lane. The note in the box still haunted him. 1981, he was first. You just never knew it. Walt whispered, "Who are you?" He flipped the photo over. Written in fading ink, Elijah R., age 9, last seen July 4th, 1981. A name he'd never heard. A face he didn't recognize. But something about the kid's eyes felt eerily familiar. He called Agent Parker. "I need a favor." Quietly, within hours, Parker returned with an archived missing persons file. One never entered into the official state database. Name, Elijah R. Johnson. Reported missing by foster mother. Case closed in 82. No follow-up. No body. Cause of closure? Lack of evidence. Walt frowned. Same excuse they gave for Deshawn McCullough. Parker nodded. That's not all. Guess who signed the report? Walt turned the page. Sheriff Rayburn. Again. The date? 2 weeks before Rayburn was sworn in as sheriff. They covered it up before he even got the badge, Walt said. They were cleaning house. Walt drove to the address from the Polaroid. An abandoned house at the edge of Hickory Lane, boarded up, overgrown with ivy. The paint peeled like shedding skin. A rusted mailbox still held a faint nameplate, Johnson. Inside, the floorboards groaned under each step. Dust danced in beams of light, cutting through broken windows. In what looked like Elijah's old room, Walt found a pile of scattered drawings. Crayon sketches, a red bicycle, a black dog, a man in a sheriff's hat standing by a van. One had 3 large letters, scribbled in red. Do well to like, share, and subscribe to my channel for amazing true crime contents. RCU, he frowned. RCU, he snapped a photo and backed out. Something was waking inside this ghost of a home. Back in town, Walt met with Tamara and Parker again at the courthouse. He showed them the sketch. Tamara went still. My grandmother used to say that when the police didn't want to find someone, they said, he went to the RCU. She thought it stood for some government camp. Something hidden. Parker checked databases. No official RCU listed in this district. But she tapped furiously. In 1979, a company called Red Cedar Utilities leased land 12 miles north of town. Guess what's there now? Let me guess, Walt said. Nothing. Exactly. A stretch of fenced forest marked as environmental disposal grounds. But no records of disposal. Just a fence. And silence. Tamara paled. That land used to be owned by my uncle. He disappeared in 1980. Walt and Parker visited the RCU site under the cover of dusk. They parked a mile off and walked the rest. The fencing was rusted. No signs. No cameras. Just an eerie stillness. Parker pulled out a device. Ground-penetrating radar. Let's see what's below. After 15 minutes, the results showed anomalies. Dozens. All shaped like human bodies. Walt whispered. Mass graves. Multiple, Parker said. And some shallow. Walt scanned the field. How many? She stared at the screen. At least 37. They looked at each other. This wasn't just Deshawn. This was systematic extermination. They returned to Walt's motel and met with Becky, who had unearthed an old cookbook from the diner's storage area, believing it might hide something. Inside its binding was a red cloth ledger, the pages brittle but filled with initials, dates, and payment amounts. Walt flipped through it. Each entry was similar. YRJ, $3,000, processing complete, D.MCC, $2,500, Filed under incident hashtag R6. TM $4,000. Held. Unresponsive. Parker's hand trembled. These are bounties. Payments. Per child. Tamara backed into a chair. What kind of town? What kind of people? Walt's voice was iron. No, this isn't the town. This was a network, hidden under the town's nose. He slammed the book shut. I'm going to destroy every single one of them. One last page of the ledger was folded and sealed in wax. Parker hesitated, then opened it, written in elegant handwriting. If the list is ever found, only he will understand. And then a list of names. Each had a date beside it and a mark. White heavy check mark equals paid. Cross mark equals eliminated. 4 o'clock equals pending. Most of the names were unknown until Walt saw one. M. Hayes, eliminated in 1986. He froze. His fingers gripped the page as though it might disappear. M. Hayes, he whispered. My brother, Marcus. Parker blinked. You have a brother? I did, Walt said. He disappeared after I came home. Everyone said he ran off to Chicago. I never saw him again. He looked up, his eyes burning. They killed him too. Later that night, Walt sat alone, the red ledger open before him, a pistol on the table beside it. Tamara returned, bringing him a faded photo of Marcus. Walt stared at it. The same eyes, the same smile. He whispered. He knew too much. Just like me. They couldn't break me, so they erased him. Tamara nodded solemnly. Then we digged them all up, every last name, every last ghost. But before they could speak again, Parker burst in, phone in hand. They found something behind the diner. What? She held up her phone. A photo of a sealed underground room, recently uncovered after the fire weakened the foundation. Spray painted on the inside wall. One of you is next. As Walt stared at the phone screen, a knock came at the motel door. He opened it. No one was there. Just a note pinned to frame with a nail. He pulled it free and opened it, in tight, careful handwriting. The boy in the Polaroid isn't who you think. He's still alive, but not for long, and you're being watched. Walt froze. A truck engine roared in the distance and sped off. Behind him, Parker whispered, Walt, do you hear that? He turned slowly toward the motel TV, still left on mute. A breaking news banner flashed. Sheriff Rayburn found dead in holding cell, apparent suicide. Except Walt's eyes saw what others might miss. On Rayburn's neck, a mark, not from a noose, but from a plastic tie. Murder. Silencing. The RCU wasn't done yet. Walt didn't sleep that night. The note pinned to his motel door had changed everything. The boy in the Polaroid isn't who you think. He's still alive, but not for long. At sunrise, he met Tamara and Agent Parker outside the diner ruins. Forensics had found a tunnel beneath the building, a small, hidden basement sealed with a heavy metal hatch. The same underground room from the photo Parker showed. Inside, they found a worn mattress, a child's shoe and bloodstains. The forensic officer whispered, Whoever was held down here, they were small, young. Walt stared at the wall. The same spray-painted warning. One of you is next. Below it, barely visible beneath flaking paint. They saw another line. ER, escaped once, won't again. Elijah, Parker muttered. He got out, Walt said, and now they want him dead. It took days and several calls to an old contact in D.C., but Parker eventually got a break. Elijah R. Johnson was entered into a protected witness program in 1982, but the program file was flagged as inactive in 1997, last seen in Georgia, off-grid since then. Walt looked at the old Polaroid. He's been running for over 40 years. They trace a lead to a rural postal box near Athens, Georgia. There, a woman had been collecting mail for her cousin under the name E. Richardson. Parker and Walt followed the trail to an old trailer park on the edge of a swamp. As they approached the last trailer, a figure stepped out, cautious and limping. He looked at Walt and froze. I know you, the man rasped. You're Marcus's brother. Walt nearly dropped to his knees. Elijah? The man's voice cracked. They killed him. I tried to stop them. Elijah had been hiding for 38 years. He was just 9 when he escaped the underground cell beneath the diner. Rayburn had wanted him dead, but someone helped him vanish. A young cop, Marcus Hayes. He smuggled me out in the back of a produce truck, Elijah whispered. He said he'd come find me once it was safe. But Marcus never did. They found him weeks later in a lake. Ruled a suicide. I knew it wasn't. Elijah said, I never stopped running after that. Tears fell down Walt's face. They killed my brother because he tried to do the right thing. Elijah nodded, and they're still watching. Elijah reached beneath a loose trailer board and pulled out a rusted tin box. Inside, a microcassette marked 1986. He recorded this. Elijah said, Marcus, before they got him. They drove straight back to the federal field office. Parker had the audio transferred and enhanced. The voice crackled, but it was unmistakably Marcus Hayes. If you're hearing this, I didn't run. I was silenced. Sheriff Rayburn, Judge Kellerman, and 3 others stay connected. Children are being taken, paid for. RCU isn't a company. It's a network, regional control unit, government contracts, disappearances, disposal. It's bigger than this town, bigger than all of us. Silence. I saw the ledger. I made copies. They're hidden in a locker at Pelican Rail Depot. Use them. Burn them. Just don't let them win. Walt's hands trembled. We need those copies. The Pelican Rail Depot hadn't been active in 20 years, but the lockers were still there, rusted and barely intact. Locker 108. Walt opened it with a crowbar. Inside, a sealed package in a yellowed envelope marked Delivered to the Department of Justice, Evidence. They tore it open. Inside, copies of full red ledger, additional pages with more names, and, most shocking, signed contracts, government seals, federal agents, payments from untraceable accounts. Even Parker's face turned to ash. This isn't just local. Walt stared at the page. Then we go public. All of it. Expose them. Parker arranged a secret meeting with an independent journalist known for publishing government corruption. They called him Jonas K., and he agreed to an anonymous broadcast, a live stream hosted from a protected VPN. That night, Walt and Elijah went on camera, faces blurred, voices altered. They told the whole story, from Deshawn to Elijah, from Marcus to the graves under RCU soil. They showed the documents, played Marcus's tape, displayed the ledger. Within hours, the story was viral. The Ghost Network, America's hidden child killings. Public outrage exploded. Protests, investigations. Whistleblowers came forward. The government was cornered, but so was Walt, because they weren't done with him yet. 2 days after the broadcast, as Walt left the motel to meet Elijah for breakfast, his car exploded. Shrapnel ripped through the parking lot. Flames erupted sky-high. If he'd been inside, he would have been vaporized. It was a message. He picked up a scrap of paper that had been thrown from the car door's glove box. Scrawled in it, "You lit the match. Now burn with us." The war had begun. While the world watched the unfolding scandal, Parker received one final document, a letter, sealed with DOJ credentials. It was sent anonymously. Inside was a list. One last page from the Red Ledger, with one chilling addition at the bottom. Do well to like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more intriguing true crime contents. W. Hayes, status, pending. Subject is resilient. Monitoring continues. Removal authorized if confirmed. Walt stared at the page. He was on the list. They had marked him long ago. Everything had been orchestrated. His arrest, his humiliation, his silence. But they failed, because he fought. 6 months later, Elijah Johnson testified before Congress under witness protection. Mass graves were exhumed. Over 48 officials were indicted. Several others disappeared, presumed dead or in hiding. Walt Hayes became a quiet legend, the man who cracked the wall. He didn't return to the diner, or the motel, or even to Georgia. He vanished. But every year, on Marcus's birthday, Tamara receives an unmarked envelope with one sentence inside. Justice is patient, but it never forgets. 1 year later, a woman in Ohio opens her mailbox. Inside, a letter, no return address. Inside, a photo, a young black boy, crying, standing in front of a van, and 3 letters spray-painted behind him. RCU. She gasps. Behind her, a shadowy figure watches. She turns to run, and the screen cuts to black.